Jim Denevan was the head baseball coach at Southwest Minnesota State for 21 seasons and also taught in the SMSU PE department. Denevan began working at SMSU in 1968 and took over the baseball program in 1971, the program's second year of existence. He led the Mustangs to 3 conference regular season championships and 1 conference tournament championship. And he also led the Mustangs to 3 NAI district championships, including hosting the NAI regional tournament in 1993. Denevan retired in 1996 as the program's all-time leader in victories with 353. Jim and his wife Marilyn live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and have 3 children.
Please welcome the newest member of the Hall of Honor, Jim Denevan.
Good afternoon. I think it's still afternoon. I want to congratulate the other inductees into the Hall of Honor. I can only think back to what one of my teachers once said when I was back at school. The mind can only comprehend what the rear can endure. We're almost done. I want to especially congratulate Rick Reinsmith, who played for me. And Rick was an inspiration, along with his buddy Gary Schlepper. Those two, I tell you, it's the only team I ever had that had Tobin, 6'7", Schlepper, 6'4", Reinsmith, 6'3". Heavens, we walked out in the field and they thought it was a football game. I would like to thank Teresa and Tom and Jim for being the presenters today. Having a father that coached is not always easy. In the early morning practices, the weekend doubleheaders, a southern trip, broken windows, batting cages that did not always work, and mood swings that were based entirely on won and losses. It's not easy. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to have the back row there, 7 or 8 of them stand up there, my grandkids. We all live in Sioux Falls together. Going from left to right is Alex, Sam, Arid, Barry, Brittany, Pat, and there it comes right through the aisle. There it is, Lizard. Thank you guys for showing up, and we now outnumber the crowd. Marilyn, my wife, of 53 years. The first 38 of those years I spent coaching 2 or more sports, teaching 12 credits a quarter, and working on a doctorate, painting houses in the summer, and all the other good things, so we didn't see each other very much. We moved 5 times in the first 3 years, first 6 years. Mrs. McGolfin's not going to appreciate this. Where are you hiding? There she is, Marilyn. We moved to Marshall, Minnesota, and my son Jimmy had been in 4 schools in 4 years. Brookings, kindergarten, and on up. Anyway, so she had her class that year put down on paper what their dad did. And when we went in for conference, she kind of laughed. Jim had put down, my dad's a migrant worker. And thus begins our episode in the city of Marshall. Marilyn, my wife, would you please stand up? she is the glue that held this whole bunch together. And I thank her every day for that. Last week, I was sitting on the back porch in Mesa, Arizona, contemplating that it's better to contemplate on the back porch in Mesa, Arizona at this time of year than it is other places, of how I got where I am and what I achieved. And I was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. My dad was disabled. He never were able to work. My mother worked 60 hours a week in a packing plant. Nobody in our neighborhood went to college unless it was to throw stones at the windows. We actually had very few people in my family. I had one uncle that graduated. So I thank God for the people that make a difference in my life and how I got where I'm at. Anybody that's been around football for any period of time understands that Ralph Ginn is the winningest coach in South Dakota State history. So with my background, I figured I'm going to join the Marines. And actually, I went down. Except that he didn't see it that way. He kept stopping down and saying, "Hey, Jim, I have a scholarship for you to play football at South Dakota State." And eventually, hard-headed as I am, he did get through. And I went up there and played football for 2 years. After that time, we progressed on, and I became a successful high school football coach, and I decided to change my school. So I got an interview at Pierre, South Dakota. Walked into Ralph Ginn's office because Brookings is right between on the way to Pierre. And he says, "What are you going to do, Jim?" I said, "I'm going to Pierre." Picks up the phone. He has A.A. Thompson, the superintendent of schools in Pierre, on speed dial. He says, "Jim won't be in for the interview." So and I said, "What am I going to do?" He says, "You're going to come here and be my defensive secondary coach." So I went to Brookings again. I went to Coach Ginn, thus set my sights on being a college professor and a coach. So the passion that I have for coaching comes from a man that did a lot of it, and he did it well. As I mentioned before, moving became a rather regular thing in the Denevan household. So it wasn't long to figure out when we got to Marshall, Minnesota, that my wife Marilyn says, "You know, this is a great place to raise kids, and it'd be nice if we could stay board one year." Her grandma had told her, "You know, I don't think Jim should be in the coaching business." She says, "Why? He can't keep a job." Anyway, so with this situation and the uniqueness of the people I got to work with and the players that I met, I've been very thankful. Some of the uniqueness is a result. We were, in 1971, Joe Driscoll, excuse me, in 1971, we had the first baseball game that Southwest won. That was out here where the new football stadium is, and the wind was blowing 42 miles an hour. And R.A. Colvin, that's been mentioned before, instituted the silo rule. There was a silo on McLaughlin's farm up there, and if you can't see that for dust, you can't play. We won that game 23-21 in a pitching duel. I mean, anything that went up, went out. In 1974, Joe Driscoll, one of my pitchers, made an agreement with a guy named Jeff Tweet. He said, if I pitch a no-hitter, what will you do? Jeff says, okay, you pitch a no-hitter, I'll show you. Well, Joe pitched a no-hitter against Dakota State. About between the first and second game, out comes the motorcycle, and here comes Jeff Tweet, bare naked. I think that's when meteorologists picked up the term wind chill. In 1981, we were playing Duluth up there, and their baseball team has more money than ours did. And they bought a keg of beer for the football team, but they sat behind our dugout and got very familiar with our guys. And this came down to some of our guys that were here. So the next year, we got to play, we were playing Duluth across, I don't know if you ever seen, but that drainage ditch there did have a crossing at one time. And that was Tom McLaughlin's field. So he pulled a hay rack across there with, what, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 of his buddies? And they hung a bulldog on the fence. Well, between games, they decided to burn the bulldog. We got it stopped about center field, the burn. The Duluth coach did not appreciate it at all. He was just not impressed. I coached roughly 800 games in 21 seasons, won 3 conference championships, had a number of district championships, had a couple regional championships. But without the support of the players, administration and staff, none of that would happen. And some of this stuff only happens here. There are people that I'd like to thank. Marilyn and I have been good friends with Mike and Karen Sterner. Mike is on one of the honorary halls. And we appreciate their support. Mike, would you work on your golf game? A couple of our friends that we live next to in Marshall for 18 years happen to be here today. We're very happy to have them here. We spend a lot of time with them. Would you, Eddie and Audrey Knutson, would you stand up? I'd also like to extend my appreciation to some other people that I've run into here that have, over the years, have stayed with us. Brad Ingebrigtsen, Darrell Weiner, Lionel Bolden. Could you guys stand up? I'm sure you don't want to see them, but every time I come back to Marshall under any kind of circumstances, these guys are always welcome me. Paul Blanchard, I'd like to thank him for continuous efforts that he has put into this program. Every time I come back to Marshall and I see Paul, he's been very welcoming. That brings me to Chris Hemelinsky. Chris, what were you, 21 years old when I first met you? He came in with this glove out of Kansas State. He says, Coach, can I work out with the team here? I didn't know that he'd signed a pro contract with Montreal. Yep. And so we got to know each other over the years. He came back and And one time he called me down at Duluth, or down at Sioux Falls when Duluth was playing there, when he was playing in the Northern League. I appreciate everything you've done for me, Chris, and I feel very welcome when I come back. As some of you know, riding motorcycles has been a passion with me. There's nothing like being 20 feet in the air at 50 miles an hour over a jump with nothing but a 218-pound motorcycle under your butt. Life to me has always been about passing the next guy. And this gave me that opportunity, I guess. Competing, never accept anything less than the best. 42 years ago, Dr. Scott, AD at the time, asked me if I would consider coaching an 0-19 team that had never won a game, that didn't have a baseball field, that had no scholarships, and bold uniforms. I said, how can I turn that down? So that's how I ended up being baseball coach. I had been baseball coach at University of North Dakota, Allendale before, but this was a challenge. I would like to conclude by thanking the SMSU. See, I've got to look at that because we had 3 name changes while I was here. And so I may be thanking another institution. Hall of Honor Committee, Chris Hemmerlesley, the Director of Athletics, had Interim President Dr. Wood. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.